The first thing I noticed about the morning I went into labor was that it smelled like rain, not the clean kind, not the kind that washes streets and softens the edges of the world. It was the thick, metallic kind that rolls in before a storm and sits heavy in the lungs, the kind that makes you feel like the sky is leaning down, pressing its full weight against your chest. I was 38 weeks and 4 days pregnant. Standing in the doorway of my small apartment with one hand braced on the frame and the other pressed flat against my side where the baby had been kicking since 4 in the morning, and I thought, of all the days, of all the possible mornings in the long stretch of the last 9 months, it had to be this one. It had to be the one that smelled like him. Darren Chase had always smelled like rain before a storm. That was the thing nobody warned you about when they talked about alpha bonds, about the way scent memory worked differently for omegas. They gave you pamphlets with diagrams. They explained the biology in flat, clinical terms. What they never told you was that 342 days after the last time you saw someone, their scent could still live in your chest like a splinter you never managed to dig out. That you could be standing in your own doorway, in your own life, surrounded by your own choices, and one breath of rain-heavy air could drag you back to a night you had spent the better part of a year trying to forget. I let the door fall shut behind me and went back inside. My neighbor, Celia, was already there. She had a key, which I had given her in the 7th month, when the idea of going into labor alone had started to feel less like a distant hypothetical and more like a genuine possibility I needed to plan for. She was in the kitchen making tea. She knew I wouldn't drink. Moving around my small space with the ease of someone who had made herself at home over a dozen evenings of terrible television and takeout containers, we left on the coffee table longer than we should have. Contractions are how far apart? She didn't look up from the kettle. 12 minutes, maybe 11. I lowered myself onto the couch with the careful, controlled dignity of someone trying very hard not to look like they were in any pain at all. It might be nothing. Celia finally looked up, and her expression was the specific variety of patient that people reserve for very stubborn children and very stubborn adults who are essentially the same thing. Stuart, your hospital bag has been packed for 3 weeks. You color-coded the contents. That was just good organization. You laminated the packing list. I didn't have a response for that, so I pressed my lips together and breathed through what was either another contraction or an extremely aggressive Braxton Hicks, which I was aware at 38 weeks was almost certainly wishful thinking. When the wave passed, I leaned back against the cushions and stared at the ceiling where a water stain in the corner had been slowly expanding since February and had now reached a size and shape that looked, depending on your angle, either like a cloud or a running dog. "I'll call the midwife," Celia said. "I'll call the midwife. You'll sit there convincing yourself it's not real." She was not wrong. I let her make the call. While she talked in the kitchen, I looked around the apartment, trying to see it the way I would later, from memory, the way you always end up looking at the last moments of one version of your life. The secondhand armchair by the window with the blanket thrown over it that I had been using for months to prop my feet. The shelf of books with the 3 dog-eared ones I had been rereading for comfort. The small basket by the door that already held the hospital bag, a spare set of keys, the folder of documents I had organized and reorganized until the tabs were soft from handling. And on the windowsill, where the light came in best in the morning, the single photograph I had not managed to put away. I had tried. Twice, actually. The first time I had taken it down, slid it into the drawer of the nightstand, and lain awake for 3 nights thinking about it being there in the dark. The second time I had gotten as far as wrapping it in a shirt and placing it in the box at the back of my closet before taking it back out at 2 in the morning, telling myself it was stupid to pretend that removing an image didn't remove a fact. The photograph was of a backyard at dusk. Someone had strung lights between 2 old trees, and underneath them a group of people were gathered around a long table, and in the middle of that group, caught mid-laugh at something off to the left of the frame, was Darren Chase. He didn't know the photo existed. I had taken it on someone else's phone, months after I swore I was done with him, during the last time I saw him in a group of mutual friends before I removed myself from that entire social orbit. I had taken it, I think, because I could already feel that I was losing the details. The specific architecture of his laugh. The way he tilted his head back just slightly when something genuinely caught him off guard. The fact that even across a backyard, in a crowd, his presence registered in my chest like a frequency I was built to receive. I had taken it to remember. I had spent the better part of a year wishing I could forget. Another contraction came. I breathed through it. When Celia reappeared in the doorway, her phone still in hand, her expression had shifted from patient to gentle, which was almost worse. They said to head in when they're 8 minutes apart or your water breaks, whichever comes first. Right. I pushed to my feet, which took longer than it once had, and reached for the basket by the door with the deliberate motion of someone who has rehearsed this moment so many times it has become routine. Okay. Stuart, I'm fine. I know you are. She crossed the room and picked up the basket before I could, looping it over her arm with the ease of someone who was going to be annoyingly practical about this, whether I liked it or not. I just wanted to say before we go that whatever happens today, I'm proud of you. You built something completely on your own. That's not a small thing. I looked at her for a moment, then at the photograph on the windowsill, then at the door. Let's go, I said. I did not take the photograph, but I also did not take the moment to look away from it as we left. The hospital was 20 minutes from my apartment. We made it in 15 because Celia drove with the focused urgency of someone completing a mission, and I sat in the passenger seat with my hands folded in my lap and tried to keep my breathing even, which was becoming progressively harder as the contractions settled into a rhythm that left increasingly little room for doubt. The intake nurse was calm and efficient and looked at my paperwork with the expression of someone who had seen every variety of human circumstance and was not going to register surprise at any of it. When she got to the line that asked for the other parent's information, I had written a single, decisive dash, and she moved past it without comment. They put me in a room on the 3rd floor, and Celia sat in the chair by the window. And the midwife came in and checked on me with the particular combination of clinical precision and genuine warmth that I had chosen her specifically for, and the hours began to move in the strange compressed, elastic way that time moves when your body is doing something enormous and irreversible. I did not think about Darren. I told myself I did not think about Darren. I thought about him in the spaces between contractions, in the strange drifting moments when the pain receded and left something quiet behind a quiet that had a shape to it, a specific hollowness that I had learned to recognize over the past several months. I thought about the conversation we'd had, the last real one, the one that had ended everything. I thought about the things I had said and the things I hadn't. I thought about the drive home afterward, alone, and the way the city had looked through the rain-streaked window of the cab, all blurred edges and running lights, like a painting that hadn't dried yet. I had made my decisions after that, all of them, alone, the way I had decided to do everything that came after. I had not called him, I had not told him. That was a choice I had made with the full weight of everything that came before it, and I was not going to second-guess it here now. In a hospital bed with a monitor strapped around the roundest I had ever been in my life, with someone very small and very insistent, making their opinion of the situation clear from the inside. "You're doing great," the midwife said. "You have to say that," I managed. "I really don't." She checked something on the monitor and made a note. "You're almost there. Let me tell you about Darren Chase. Let me tell you the true version, not the one I told myself for the first several months of our separation. The version in which I was clear-eyed and right about everything, and he was simply a collection of red flags I had failed to read in time. That version was clean, and it was useful for a while, but it was not accurate, and I am tired of carrying things that are not accurate. We met at a conference. That detail has always felt absurd to me. The kind of origin story that sounds like the setup for a joke. 2 people in lanyards reaching for the last decent cup of coffee in a hospitality suite at 7:30 in the morning. But that is exactly what happened, and the absurdity of it is, I think, part of what made me lower my guard. You don't brace for the lightning bolt in the conference hotel. He was taller than I expected. That's the first thing I remember thinking, which is a strange first thought because I had no expectations about his height before meeting him. But there it was. He was tall, and he had dark eyes that moved with the quality of attention I had rarely seen outside of people I deeply admired, and his scent hit me 3 seconds before he said a word and rearranged something in my chest that I would not fully understand for another 2 weeks. I think we both need this more than the other person, he said, nodding at the coffee carafe between us. I need it more, I told him. I've been awake since 4. I've been awake since 3. Do you want a competition or the coffee? He laughed. That was the first time I saw it. The thing I later tried to photograph from across a backyard, the way his head tilted back just slightly. Like the laugh was too big for his face to contain it entirely, and some of it had to escape upward. Both, he said, but I'll take the coffee first. We split it, which neither of us had suggested, and both of us somehow did anyway, falling into an easy alignment that I would later recognize as the first symptom of something I was already in the middle of by the time I noticed it. We talked through the morning session that neither of us attended through lunch, that we ended up eating at a corner table away from the larger group, through an afternoon panel that we sat in the back of and spent half of writing notes to each other in the margins of the program. He was thoughtful in the specific way that is different from being merely intelligent. He listened with his whole attention, which sounds simple and is, in practice, extraordinarily rare. When I said something, he heard it. Not the approximate shape of it, not the version he expected, but the actual thing I said. He asked questions that suggested he had already thought carefully about what I might mean before asking what I meant. I was not looking for anything. I want to be clear about that. I was 31 years old, and I had organized my life into something that worked not beautifully, not without compromise, but it functioned and it was mine, and I was not in any particular state of longing for it to change. I had had relationships before. I knew what I was capable of feeling. I thought I knew my own limits. Darren Chase did not respect my limits, and the thing that made it complicated was that he never pushed. He simply existed with such consistency and warmth, and that specific quality of presence that my limits rearranged themselves quietly, over time, without me noticing until I was already somewhere I hadn't planned to be. We were together for 14 months. 14 months is not a long time in the scope of a life. I know that. I have told myself that many times, in the specific way you tell yourself something true, that you also wish were more comforting than it is. 14 months is enough time to learn someone's rhythms, to know how they wake up and how they fall asleep and what they look like in the middle of the night when something is worrying them and they think you can't tell, to know the exact register of their voice when they are saying something they mean completely, and the slightly different register when they are saying something they wish were true. To know, also, when something is wrong in a way that neither of you knows how to fix. The bond was the thing neither of us planned for and neither of us discussed until it was too late to discuss it without the conversation being shaped by the fact of it already existing. That was my fault, partly. I felt it forming, and I said nothing, partly from disbelief, partly from the old and practiced wariness of an Omega who had learned to be careful about the difference between what he felt and what he was biologically inclined to feel. I had always been skeptical of the bond mythology, the idea of a fated resonance, a connection written into your biochemistry that transcended choice. It seemed like a convenient story, an explanation for dependency that people reached for because the alternative, which was simply acknowledging how much you loved someone and how terrifying that was, felt too exposed. But there it was, and it was, in its way, remarkable. And then, slowly, it wasn't enough. This is the part where the clean version of the story would assign blame more neatly than reality allows. The truth is that we were two people who loved each other and also wanted fundamentally different things. And we discovered that too late, after the wanting had already become one of the primary facts of our lives. Darren wanted to stay. In the city, in his career, in the version of the future he had been building since before I was part of it. He had family there, obligations, a practice he had spent years establishing. He was not someone who moved lightly, and his rootedness, which had once felt like stability, like something I could anchor to, began to feel, over the long turn of that second year, like a wall. I had an offer, a real one, the kind that doesn't come around twice, in a city 3 time zones away, doing work I had been pointing toward for a decade. It was not a casual ambition. It was the kind of thing you build your whole professional trajectory toward, and when it arrived, solid and specific and requiring an answer, I felt the pull of it so strongly that I was already, in some deep and quiet part of myself, gone before I had said a word about it to Darren. That was not fair. I know that. I told him about the offer. We had the conversation. The first one, and then the second one, and then the long, grinding series of conversations that all circled the same center without ever landing, each one leaving us further from where we had started. He was not unsupportive, which was somehow harder than if he had been. He said the right things. He said he wanted me to be happy, which I believe was true, and he also made it clear, through the careful architecture of everything he didn't say, that he could not follow me. I told him I couldn't stay. We said other things. Things that cannot be unsaid, the kind that accumulate in the space between two people who are trying to end something and are terrified of it and are therefore, paradoxically, making it worse. I said something about the bond that I regret. He said something about my choices that I think he also regrets. And then I left. I went back to my apartment and I sat on the floor of my kitchen for 40 minutes, which felt appropriate for how catastrophic the situation was. And then I got up and made a plan. Because making a plan is what I do when everything has come apart. 6 weeks later, I took the job. I moved to a new city, to the small apartment with the water stain and the secondhand armchair and the window that got good light in the mornings, and I began building the next version of my life. 8 weeks after that, I found out I was pregnant. I sat with that information for a long time, days. I carried it around, quiet and specific, while I went to work and came home and made dinner and called my mother and did all the things that make up the ordinary texture of a life. I thought about it in the morning and in the middle of the night and during the Tuesday afternoon meetings that ran too long, and I turned it over from every angle I could find. Because this was not a thing I could organize my way out of. I had the right to choose. I want to say that clearly, for myself, because it matters. I had the right to choose, and I chose to continue. And I knew when I made that choice that I was also choosing to do it alone. Darren was 3 time zones away. We had ended on words I could not take back. Whatever the bond still carried between us, whatever the biology of it still whispered in the small hours, I had made a decision about my life, and I was going to live in it. I did not tell him. I told myself this was protecting both of us, that he had his life and I had mine, and introducing this into the space between us would only destroy the fragile, necessary distance we had managed to create. I told myself that many times. In the better moments, I almost believed it. In the less good moments, usually around 3 in the morning, with my hands flat on the growing curve of my stomach, I knew it was also cowardice. A specific kind I had learned to be very skilled at disguising as self-sufficiency. But I had made the choice, and I had lived it for 8 months. And I was in a hospital room, and my son or daughter was coming whether I had resolved my feelings about any of this or not. And that, at least, was something I could focus on completely. That was something I could do. The labor took 11 hours. I won't detail all of it. Some of it does not translate into narrative. The specific quality of pain that exists outside language, the strange timelessness of it, the way it reduces everything to a single, insistent present. Celia stayed. The midwife came and went in a pattern I tracked as a kind of reassurance. Her rhythm was its own sort of calm. I called my mother during the earlier hours, during a window when the contractions were still manageable and I could hold a phone and speak in complete sentences. She cried, which I expected, and said she was booking a flight for the next morning, which I also expected. She asked me 3 times if I was sure I didn't want her there right now, and I told her 3 times that I was sure that I had Celia, that everything was under control, and she said, "Stuart, nothing about childbirth is under control," which was the most honest thing anyone said to me all day. Somewhere around hour 7, the midwife used the phrase, "We're making good progress," in a tone that suggested progress had been a point of some uncertainty up until recently. And I decided not to think too hard about what that meant and focus instead on the very concrete and immediate business of what my body was doing. Celia, at some point, read aloud to me from a book she had in her bag, one of those nature writing collections that is either deeply soothing or deeply annoying depending on your current mental state. Sections of it were soothing. She was a good reader. She had a steady, unhurried voice, and she kept her eyes on the page and didn't look at me with that expression that people get, the one that means they're worried but are trying not to show it. The expression I had been seeing on various faces for 8 months and had grown very tired of. I thought about my child, the specific, solid, present reality of them, the being who had been with me through all of it, through the new city and the new job and the late nights and the lonely ones, who had been there through every version of this year. I thought about who they would be, what they would find funny, what would make them laugh, the way Darren's head tilted back when something genuinely caught him. I stopped that thought before it finished. Around hour 10, Celia stepped out to use the restroom, and in the few minutes she was gone. A nurse came in to check the monitor, and I was alone in the room in the specific way that hospitals make you alone, surrounded by equipment and light that hums at a frequency slightly outside normal. And I looked at the ceiling, and I thought with a clarity that I had been avoiding for 8 months that whatever happened next, I had done this. I had made every decision. I had sat with all of it, and carried all of it, and built something in the shape of a life that could hold what was coming, and I did not know yet if it would be enough. But it was real, and it was mine. Celia came back. The midwife came back. The hours finished. And at 4:17 in the morning, my daughter arrived. She was small and loud and completely herself from the first second, announcing her presence with the absolute confidence of someone who had been planning this entrance for 38 weeks and was executing it exactly on schedule. They put her on my chest, and she stared at me with the unfocused intensity of someone taking inventory. And I looked at her, and the 11 hours, and the 8 months, and the 14 months, and all of it simply receded the way floodwater recedes, leaving behind a changed landscape, but a visible one. She had dark eyes. Of course she did. I had known she would. "Hey," I said to her, very quietly. "I've been waiting for you." She made a sound that was not quite a word, and not one. And I laughed, which surprised me, a real laugh that came from somewhere below all the exhaustion and all the feeling. And Celia made a soft noise from the chair by the window that was probably her crying, but that she would deny later. And the midwife said something practical about APGAR scores, and the room was very warm. I named her Rowan. I had decided that months ago, lying awake one night when the choice had simply arrived, the way some certainties do, fully formed and quiet. Rowan Flores. She was here. She was mine. And then 30 minutes later, there was a knock on the door of my room, and Celia opened it. And one of the floor nurses leaned in with the careful expression of someone delivering information they were not entirely sure how to deliver, and said, "Mr. Flores, there's someone in the hall asking to see you. He says his name is Darren Chase. Day S." I heard the name, the way you hear something in the first moments after waking, before the world has fully assembled itself around you, with the unreal clarity of something that is happening, but that your brain hasn't yet filed in the correct folder. Then the world assembled itself around me. My daughter was in my arms, not 40 minutes old, her dark eyes drifting in the particular way of very new people for whom sleep and wakefulness have not yet established a clear border between them. I was wearing a hospital gown, and I had not slept in somewhere over 24 hours, and my hair was doing something I was choosing not to think about, and Darren Chase was standing in the hallway outside my room. Darren Chase, who was 3 time zones away. Who had been 3 time zones away for the better part of a year. Darren Chase, who I had not told. The nurse was still waiting in the doorway with her careful expression. Celia had turned from the door and was looking at me with something I couldn't fully categorize. Not quite surprise, because she knew who Darren was. She had heard about Darren in the way you hear about someone who shaped a significant period of your friend's life. Not quite judgment. Something more like the particular stillness of someone who is waiting for you to know what you need. Tell him. I started, then stopped. Tell him what? Every possible completion of that sentence arrived and departed, and none of them were right. Tell him I'm not here. He could walk down the hall and check. Tell him to leave, and watch that become the next decision I had to live in. Tell him to wait, and then what? What came after waiting? What did I say to him when I walked out with Rowan in my arms, and the entirety of the last year standing between us like weather? I need a minute, I told the nurse. Of course. She withdrew with the practiced discretion of someone who had navigated complicated emotional terrain in hospital corridors before. Celia crossed the room and sat in the chair beside me and did not say anything, which was the right thing to do, and I looked at my daughter's face and tried to think. He was here. That was the first fact, and it was enormous. He was here, which meant he had traveled 3 time zones, which meant he had known or found out, or had somehow arrived at a knowledge that I had spent 8 months actively preventing. And the question of how was already assembling itself in my mind and simultaneously didn't matter yet. Didn't matter compared to the fact of the hall and the door and the 30 feet of corridor between me and a conversation I had been not having for all of this time. Did you know he was coming? I asked Celia. No, I believed her. She had been with me for 11 hours. She had not reached for her phone with the guilty frequency of someone managing an incoming complication. Then how? I said, mostly to myself. You can ask him, Celia said carefully, if you decide to see him. If. I looked at Rowan. Her breathing was the small, even rhythm of someone for whom the world was, as yet, entirely manageable. Her hands were curled at her chest in the way of very new people who haven't yet learned to extend themselves toward things. She looked like him. Not overwhelmingly, not in a way that a stranger would immediately notice, but in the specific, quiet way that I had known she would, the way genetics move through people whether you invited them or not. The set of her eyes, the way her features had arranged themselves into an expression that was already, somehow, more his than mine. I had spent 8 months preparing for that fact. I had not prepared for him to be 20 feet down the hall when I confronted it. I need you to go out and see what his demeanor is, I said to Celia. Don't tell him anything. Just look at him and come back and tell me what you see. No. She stood without argument and went to the door and stepped out. And I sat in the quiet room with the humming light and my daughter in the full accumulated weight of everything I had decided alone, and I waited. She was back in less than 2 minutes. He's sitting on the floor, she said. I looked at her. Against the wall, across from the door, he's sitting on the floor, and he has his arms on his knees and his head down. A pause. He doesn't look angry, Stuart. He looks... She searched for the word. He looks the way people look when they've been afraid for a very long time, and they're trying not to show anyone how much. I knew that look. I knew it because I had seen it before in the particular geometry of how he held himself when something was costing him more than he wanted to admit. The way he distributed the weight of it through his shoulders and the tilt of his head, the way he pressed his knuckles together when he was keeping himself very still on purpose. My chest did something that I decided to examine later. Okay, I said. Celia waited. Tell him he can come in. I heard him in the hallway before I saw him. Not his footsteps exactly, not in any dramatic sense. It was subtler than that, the faint, unmistakable alteration in the air that I had learned in 14 months to recognize as him. The specific frequency of his presence that my biology had cataloged and filed without my permission and had apparently maintained in perfect working order for 342 days. The door opened. He was thinner than I remembered. That was the first thing I noticed. The way you notice a change in a landscape you once knew well, not the dramatic kind, but the incremental kind that accumulates over distance and time. His dark eyes found me immediately the way they always had. with the particular directness that had once made me feel seen in a way I was not accustomed to, and had later made me feel exposed in a way I wasn't sure I'd consented to. He stopped just inside the door. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The hospital room had the quality of a held breath, that particular acoustic that makes silence audible. And in it, I could hear Rowan's small, even breathing, and the distant sound of the corridor, and the fact that my own heartbeat had reorganized itself in a way that was inconvenient and not surprising. Stuart. His voice was low, careful, the voice of someone who has spent a significant amount of time rehearsing something and has now arrived at the moment when none of the rehearsal is going to be sufficient. "You're here," I said, because it was true and because I did not yet have anything more specific to offer. He looked at me. He looked at the small person in my arms. Something moved through his face that I did not have a precise name for, but that I recognized as the kind of feeling that lives below the level of language. The kind that arrives before you have words to put around it. "I'm here," he said. Celia rose from the chair with the quiet efficiency of someone performing a necessary exit. She crossed the room, touched my shoulder briefly as she passed, and said, so softly that the words were almost more texture than sound, "I'll be right outside." Then she was gone, and the door was closed, and it was the two of us and Rowan and the humming light and 342 days of everything we had not said to each other. Darren moved to the chair Celia had vacated, not quickly, not with any presumption, but with the deliberate care of someone who understood that every movement in this room was weighted. He sat, and he looked at me and then at Rowan, and I watched his throat move. "How did you know?" I asked. "Marcus." A mutual friend, someone I had not successfully removed from all the orbits. He saw a post, someone who knew you, not someone close, just a person who knew you were expecting. They posted something about the baby coming. He stopped. He told me last night, at about 9 o'clock. I calculated. Last night at 9 o'clock, my labor had been underway for 4 hours. "You got on a plane at 9 o'clock, I said. "I got in the car at 9 o'clock. The first flight was at 11. I landed at 2:30. A pause. "I've been in the hall since about 3:15, more than an hour." He had been sitting on the floor of the corridor for more than an hour. I looked at my daughter. I looked at him. "I didn't tell you," I said. "I made a decision and I didn't tell you, and you should know that I made that decision deliberately, not from forgetting or confusion. I knew what I was doing. I know." His voice was very even. "I'm not apologizing for it. I'm not asking you to. But I'm also—" I stopped, started again. "I am aware that it was not without cost. To you. I am aware of that." Darren looked at his hands for a moment, then back at me. "Can I ask you something?" I nodded. "Were you planning to tell me, at some point, any point?" I had thought about this. Over 8 months, I had thought about it from so many angles that the question had worn grooves in me, that I could feel the grooves even now. "I don't know," I said, and the honesty of it was heavier than I expected. I think I told myself it was better this way, cleaner. That we had ended and this was my life now, and bringing you into it would only— I stopped again. I was afraid. Something shifted in his expression. Very small, very specific. "Of what?" he asked. "Of you being here and it being the way it used to be, and then—" I searched for the right words, the ones that were true without being more than I could hold right now. At 4-something in the morning, with no sleep and a new person in my arms, and all of this arriving at once. Of wanting something that wasn't possible and having to lose it again. The silence after that was different from the silence before. Darren leaned forward slightly, elbows on knees, the posture I recognized from 100 evenings, the one that meant he was thinking carefully and was not going to speak until he had something real to offer. "The night you left," he said finally, "the last thing I said to you. You don't have to. I do. I do. Quiet but certain. The thing I said about your choices, the way I said it. I have thought about that almost every day since." I remembered. He had said it in the register of someone who was exhausted and hurting, and had briefly stopped filtering what the exhaustion and hurt were producing, and what came out had been accurate in the specific, weaponized way that things you know about someone can be accurate, the kind of truth that is also a wound. I said things too, I said. You said things that were true. He looked at me directly. I said something that was true in a way that was also unkind, and I have never found a way to correct it that doesn't require talking to you. Rowan made a small sound between us, the barely audible creak of someone adjusting their position in the way of someone very new to having a body and not yet sure of the logistics of it. Both of us looked at her. The atmosphere in the room changed again. There is a particular gravity that attaches to the presence of a very new person. It rearranges the air around them. "May I?" Darren said, and stopped. The question was incomplete, but I understood it. I looked at him for a long moment. The man I had loved for 14 months and had been not loving for the better part of a year, which is itself a kind of love, the labor-intensive kind that requires constant maintenance to sustain. The man whose scent had lived in my chest like a splinter since the day I left, who had gotten on a plane at 11 at night and sat on a hospital floor for over an hour. "Her name is Rowan," I said. He said it quietly, once, like testing the sound of it. "Rowan. Rowan Flores." Another pause. Something complicated moved across his face and was absorbed before I could fully read it. "She has your nose," he said. "She has your eyes." The words arrived before I could decide whether to say them, and then they were there in the room between us, and I watched him receive them the particular way his face handled it. Not with triumph or relief, but with something that was quieter and harder and more real than either. "Stuart," he said, I'm not here to make a claim. I don't want you to think that's what this is. I know I don't have a right to walk in here and—" "Darren." He stopped. "I know why you're here." A long pause. "Why?" he asked. And it was genuine, the question. He was asking because he was not entirely sure he knew the answer himself, because he had acted before he had fully articulated the reason, even to himself, which was, I had always thought. One of the truest things about him, the way he moved toward the people who mattered to him on instinct before reason. A man who led with what he felt and found the words for it later. I looked at my daughter, at her dark eyes and the arrangement of her features that was already, even now, familiar to me in the way that people are familiar when they carry something of someone you know. "Because she's yours," I said, "and because you are." I stopped, steadied. "Because, despite everything, despite all of it, you are someone who sits on a hospital floor for an hour rather than knock when you're not sure of your welcome. And that matters." The quiet between us was different now. It had a texture to it, the texture of things that have been said that cannot be unsaid, not the cruel kind, not this time, but the kind that opens something rather than closing it. "I don't know what this looks like," I said. "Going forward, I don't have a plan for this part." "Neither do I," he said it without apology. "But I'd like to be here, if you'll have that. Whatever form it takes. Pause. Whatever you decide." I looked at him, at his dark eyes, and the weight they were carrying, and the careful way he was holding all of it, not putting it down, not asking me to carry it, just holding it where I could see it. "Do you want to hold her?" I asked. He exhaled. "Just once, just barely, but I heard it." "Yes," he said. I taught him how to hold her. That sentence, written out, seems smaller than it was. But there is something about watching someone receive a person who is also partially theirs. The careful, uncertain way Darren held out his arms, and the even more careful way I positioned Rowan into them. Both of us focused on the practical logistics as a way of managing the enormous emotional weight of the moment. The angle of the arm, the support under the head, the particular adjustment when she made a small unhappy sound and he froze and looked at me and I said, "She's fine. She just needs a second to settle." And she did. She settled, and his face did the thing I had seen it do in the photograph on my windowsill. Not quite the laugh, the precursor to the laugh, the moment just before something breaks through. He sat in the chair and held her, and I sat back against the elevated bed and watched them, and the sky outside the window was doing the thing it does in the very early hours that deep. Pre-dawn darkening before the light begins to suggest itself at the edges. She's very small, he said. She's average-sized, actually. The midwife said so. She doesn't look average-sized. That's because you've never held a newborn. I've held newborns. Have you? My cousin's kids. A pause. Admittedly, several years ago. Another pause. She's very small. I smiled. I couldn't help it. It arrived without my permission, the way real ones do. He caught it. His eyes came up from Rowan's face and found mine, and for a moment, we were looking at each other from across a room that also contained everything that had happened and everything that had been said. And the smile that came onto his face was not the photograph version, not the tilted back caught off guard version. It was smaller and quieter and more careful, the kind you offer when you understand that you are in a fragile space and you do not want to damage it. "What are you going to tell her?" he asked. "About all of this, when she's old enough to ask." "The truth," I said, "in age-appropriate increments." "What is the truth?" I thought about it. Really thought. Not the rehearsed version, not the version I had been preparing for months, but the actual one. The one that was true right now in this room, with the sky going from black to deep blue outside the window and my daughter asleep in his arms. "That two people loved each other very much," I said. "And that love, even when it's real, doesn't always know how to solve all its own problems. And that she was wanted. From the very beginning, she was wanted." That part is simple. Something moved across his face. He looked back at Rowan. "The rest," I said, "we figure out." He nodded slowly. "The rest we figure out." "That is not an invitation to assume anything," I said, "because I am who I am. Or to skip steps. There are things between us that still exist and aren't resolved." "I know. I'm not. This isn't a reunion, Darren. I want to be honest about that." "I know." He met my eyes again. "I'm not here for a reunion. I'm here because I spent 342 days trying to be someone who had closed a chapter and I was failing. And then last night I found out there was something I didn't know, something that mattered. And I couldn't do the calculated thing. I'm sorry that it lands here, at this hour, like this. I know the timing is catastrophic," I offered. The corner of his mouth moved. I was going to say complicated. "It is both. It is both," he agreed. Rowan made a small sound and then settled again, deeper into sleep. His whole attention dropped to her immediately, the instinctive responsiveness of someone who was already, without deciding to, tuned to her frequency. I noticed that. I filed it. "You should know," I said, "that I'm not moving back." "I know. My life is here. My work is here. I've built something here that I'm not dismantling it." "Stuart." His voice was very quiet, very steady. "I'm not asking you to. I understand that you built something. I'm not here to take it apart." "Then what are you here for?" Not accusatory, genuinely asking. He thought about it. The honest pause of someone who respects the question enough to actually consider it. "To meet her," he said finally. "To be someone she knows. To do that right, whatever it takes and wherever it happens." He paused. "And to tell you that I was wrong about what I said. The thing I said at the end that I've been carrying. I don't expect that changes anything, but I needed to say it where you could hear it." The sky outside the window had gone from deep blue to a very pale gray at the horizon. "I heard it," I said. Silence. Then, "Stuart, can I ask you one more thing?" "You can ask." "The 8 months, being here, doing all of it, was it?" He searched carefully for the right framing. "Are you okay?" The question landed differently than I expected. Not the clinical version, not the "are you managing" one, the one underneath it. The one that was really asking about the weight of all those months, the 3 o'clock mornings, the appointments attended alone. The decisions made in the privacy of my own judgment without anyone to share the doubt with. I looked at Rowan in his arms, at the steady, unknowing peace of her. Then, at him, at the cost on his face that he was not hiding from me. The sleepless flight and the floor of the corridor, and all the months of his own carrying, that I could see clearly because I had 14 months of learning exactly how he held the things that cost him. I am, I said. I think I am, but I won't pretend it wasn't. I stopped. It was a lot to hold alone. I know, he said, with a weight in it that meant he had been holding his own version, and that even if the shapes of what we'd carried were different, the effort of it was the same. We sat with that. The room was quiet in the way it only is at that particular hour, the deep lull that comes just before the world begins to reassemble. She really is very small, he said after a while. She's going to hear you say that and hold it against you for the rest of her life. He looked at me, and this time the laugh made it all the way through. The small version, the quiet one, but real. Good, he said. Then she'll have a reason to keep talking to me. Celia came back at around 6 in the morning, having spent several hours in a hospital waiting room with a terrible novel, and I suspected some degree of strategic patience, giving us more time than any of us had explicitly requested. She appeared in the doorway, took in the room, the pale dawn light, Darren still in the chair, and Rowan now back in my arms, and arranged her expression into something that communicated nothing except quiet approval. There's terrible coffee in the family lounge, she offered. I'll go, Darren said. He stood, and there was a small moment of logistics as he navigated the space, the instinctive, careful routing around me and Rowan that already had the quality of someone who understood where things were and who had the most important position in the room. He went out. The door closed softly. Celia sat in the chair he had vacated and looked at me with the full attention of someone who had given me plenty of time to process and was now prepared to be my friend about it. Well, she said. Well, I agreed. Do you want to talk about it? Not yet. Okay. She looked at Rowan. She's beautiful, by the way. In case the last several hours didn't give you adequate opportunity for me to say that properly. Thank you. Dark eyes. A pause. I can see what you mean about the resemblance. Everyone who knew him will be able to see it immediately. Is that going to be a problem? I thought about it. No, I said. I don't think so. Not the way it might have been before. I looked at my daughter. She looks like herself. Whatever else she also looks like, she's primarily herself. Celia nodded. What happens now? It was the question that had been sitting in the room since Darren walked in. The one neither of us had fully answered yet. The one that was going to require considerably more than a single night to resolve even partially. I don't know, I said. We figure it out. I paused. I know it sounds honest. I don't want to make promises I can't keep. Not to him and not to myself. There's a lot between us that is still real, and not all of it is good, and I'm not going to pretend that a very dramatic arrival at a hospital changes all the things it doesn't change. But I looked at her. There's a but in there somewhere, she said, not unkindly. I thought about the hour in the corridor, about the plane at 11 and the floor against the wall, about the way he had asked, genuinely, whether I was okay, and the weight he put in the word okay that made it about more than just the night. But, I said, he came, and I stopped. That matters. However inconvenient it is for the version of events I had organized, it matters. Celia smiled. A small one, real. For what it's worth, she said. He looked, when he was sitting in the hall, like someone who had calculated that he might not be let in and had decided to come anyway. That's a particular kind of choice. I know. The kind that's hard to dismiss. Celia. I looked at her. I am aware of all of this. I'm also sitting here with a 6-hour-old baby and no sleep, and a man I have complicated feelings about currently getting me terrible hospital coffee. I'm not going to have everything resolved today. I know, she said. I just wanted to make sure you knew that the right not to dismiss it is also yours. Darren came back with 3 cups of coffee in a cardboard carrier, the specific, terrible kind that exists only in hospital family lounges and that has a particular institutional flavor that nobody has ever described as good, but that is, under the right circumstances, exactly what is needed. He set them on the small table by the window, and looked at us both with the slightly uncertain quality of someone who had entered a room mid-conversation and was navigating it with appropriate care. "Thank you," I said. He nodded. Sat back down, this time in the chair further from the bed, giving Celia the closer one, which was a small thing and also not a small thing. We drank our coffee as the sky outside the window completed its transition from pale gray to the particular pale gold of a morning after rain, and Rowan slept, and no one said anything for a while. And the quiet was, for the first time, in a very long time, a comfortable one. My mother arrived the next morning with 3 suitcases, and the energy of someone who had been waiting 8 months to fully deploy her feelings about the situation, and was now prepared to do so in a sustained and comprehensive manner. She did not comment on Darren's presence in the hospital. She looked at him when I introduced him with the precise expression of a woman who had a great deal to say and was choosing in this particular moment not to say any of it, which was its own considerable act of restraint. She held Rowan for 20 minutes and cried twice, and then sat down next to me on the hospital bed and held my hand and said quietly, so only I could hear, "You did a very hard thing." "I know," I said. "I want you to know I'm proud of you. You said that on the phone. I'm saying it in person now. It's different." She squeezed my hand. "You're going to be a wonderful father." Darren left that afternoon, after we had exchanged numbers again, after I had given him information about Rowan with the careful specificity of someone drawing a map of a country they are still in the process of charting. He did not ask for more than I offered. He did not push or suggest or attempt to negotiate his way toward more certainty than the moment contained. He said goodbye to Rowan quietly to her face, which she received with the serene indifference of someone who has not yet learned that goodbyes carry weight. And then he looked at me with all the things that were still open between us in plain view on his face, not hidden, not performed just there. "I'll call," he said. "Okay, when is a good time?" "Evenings, after 6. "Not weekends yet, that's going to be complicated, figuring out the schedule." "Right." He nodded. "Stuart. Yeah, He stopped. Tried again. "Thank you for letting me in." I looked at him, at the specific person he was in all his fullness, the things I had loved about him, and the things that had cost us, and the thing we had made together, who was currently asleep in a hospital bassinet and had no idea any of this was happening. "She needed you to be here," I said, "even if I'm still figuring out what I need." "That's fair." "Yes," I said, "it is." He left. The room was quieter after, but not empty. In the weeks that followed, things were not simple. I want to be honest about that because I think the version of this story that moves quickly toward resolution is a lie, and I have had enough of useful lies. They are the stories we tell ourselves when the truth is too jagged to hold for the full length of time it actually takes to hold it. He called, in the evenings. We talked about Rowan first, always, because she was the concrete thing, the shared territory we could navigate without having to negotiate the larger landscape. He asked questions with the attentiveness I had always known him for, listened with his whole attention to the details I shared, the way she had started to track light across the room, the sound she made in the mornings that I had started to describe to myself as conversational. We talked about other things, sometimes. Carefully, the way you move through a room where the furniture has been rearranged and you haven't fully relearned the layout. He was building something toward me. I could feel it. The patient, incremental architecture of someone who understood that trust, once broken, even in partial and complicated ways, is rebuilt slowly or not at all. I was not ready to meet him halfway. Not immediately. But I was, very gradually, willing to remain in the conversation. At 6 weeks he came to visit. I will not detail all of it, but I will say that he held Rowan for an entire afternoon while I slept a real sleep, the first one of any duration I had managed since she arrived. And when I woke up, I could hear him talking to her very quietly in the next room, narrating something I couldn't hear what. In the low, easy voice of someone who had decided they were going to be present for this person and was practicing it in real time. I lay in the dark of my room and listened to that voice, and I felt the grief of everything that had been lost, and the reality of everything that still existed, and the terrifying, inconvenient, impossible to resolve fact that both of those things were true simultaneously, and that I was going to have to learn to live inside that truth for a very long time. At 3 months, we had the first real conversation. Not the first, since all of it we had been having conversations, but the first one that was actually about us, about what had happened between us. The conversation we had been circling since the night in the hospital when he said he had been wrong about the thing he said at the end. It happened over the phone after Rowan was asleep. In the specific quiet of my apartment at 10 o'clock at night, when the city had settled into its lower register and the only light in the room was the lamp by the armchair. He said the thing he had been trying to say since the hospital, the full version without abbreviation, and I listened to all of it, and then I said the things I had been carrying on my side. The ones about the choices I had made, and the cowardice that had lived inside some of them, and the fear that had driven all of it. We were on the phone for 3 hours. My ear hurt afterward. But something, at the end of it, was different. Not fixed, that was too clean a word, too finite. Different. Shifted. Shifted. Like terrain after an earthquake, rearranged into a new geography that has its own logic even if it takes time to learn. At 5 months, he moved. Not to my apartment, I want to be clear about that. Not to my life in the way of someone reclaiming territory. He found his own apartment in the same city, a 20-minute drive from mine, because this was where Rowan was, and he had decided with the decisiveness he brought to the things that mattered most to him, that this was where he needed to be. He rearranged his professional life to make it possible. He did it without making it a negotiation, without using it as leverage, without asking me to receive it as a gesture that required a particular response. He just did it, the way he had gotten on the plane, the way he had sat on the floor of the corridor, leading with what he felt and finding the words later. I received it without knowing yet what I was going to do with it. We found a rhythm. It was not the rhythm of before. It could not be. That version of us existed only in the past now, a country we had both left, and returning was not the same as going home. This was something new, being built from the materials of what we had been and what had happened and who we were now, which was not who we had been 14 months ago. More specifically, more honest with each other about the costs of things, more careful in the way of people who have learned through experience what carelessness produces. Rowan learned to hold eye contact, then to smile, the involuntary kind that arrives before they know what they're doing with their face. Then the deliberate kind, the one that chooses you. She chose both of us, reliably, with the entire absence of ambivalence of someone who has no reason yet for ambivalence. This is the story I will tell Rowan when she is old enough to want to know it. Not all of it at once, not the complicated middle, not yet, not until she has the context for what complicated means, what it costs, and what it produces. But the shape of it, the shape that is the truest one. There were two people who loved each other and who also didn't always know how to be what each other needed at the same time. That's not a simple failure, and it's not a simple story. It's the kind of thing that happens between real people who are doing their best with the equipment they have and the fears they carry and the specific, particular ways their lives have made them who they are. And there was a morning when one of those people got on a plane and came anyway before he had been invited, before he had permission, before he knew what he would find on the other side of that hospital door, and the other person let him in, not because they had resolved everything, but because love, even at its most complicated, even after the things that break it, is not nothing. It persists. It takes different shapes. It requires more work than the feeling of it suggests. She will hear this story and she will ask questions, the way she asks questions about everything, with the direct, unembarrassed curiosity of someone who has not yet learned that curiosity can be refused. She will ask why we didn't stay together at first, and I will tell her, because we were both figuring out who we were and what we needed, and sometimes that takes more time than you have in one place. She will ask if we love each other, and I will tell her yes. Not simply or without complication, but yes. She will ask if we're happy now, and I will look at the answer honestly before I give it. Because here is what I know, 9 months out from a hospital room that smelled like disinfectant and the early morning from a doorway where a man sat on a floor and waited to be let in, not knowing if he would be. I know that I built something. I built a life in a new city and a body that grew a person and a self that held all of it together through the months when there was no one but me to hold it. And that is real, and it is mine. And I am not going to minimize it by pretending the harder parts of it weren't hard. I know that Darren Chase is 20 minutes from my apartment and has learned which mornings are the ones where I need him to bring coffee and not say much, and which ones are the ones where I need him to take Rowan, so I can sit alone for a while and be nobody's parent for 20 minutes. He has learned these things because he paid attention, which is the thing he has always done. I know that we are not the same as we were. That the 14 months and the separation and the year of carrying separate things have changed us in ways that cannot be changed back. That we are different people in some of our key dimensions than we were when we fell in love in a conference hotel over a shared cup of coffee. That the road back to each other, if it is a road back and not a road forward to something new entirely, is longer than the simple gravity of what we felt would suggest. I know that some evenings he is at my apartment, not sleeping here but staying late, the two of us at the kitchen table, after Rowan is asleep, talking about the things we are still working out. And sometimes not talking, just existing in the same room with the particular ease of people who know each other well enough to be quiet together, and those evenings have a quality I do not entirely have language for, except that they feel in some essential way like something being rebuilt rather than something being lost. I know that it is not simple. I know that we have not resolved everything. I know that there are things we did to each other that take longer than 9 months to fully metabolize, and that the bond between us is complicated by all of it in ways that I am still learning to navigate, and I know that this morning, when Rowan woke at 5:30, and I went into her room and picked her up, and she looked at me with her dark eyes and made the sound that I have started to call her good morning sound. I felt something that I cannot say more simply than, this is where I am supposed to be. Not in the fated sense, not in the written in the stars sense that I have always been skeptical of, in the sense that I am here, in this room, with this person, in this life, and it is mine, and it is real, and it is enough. And in 40 minutes, Darren is going to ring the doorbell, and I am going to open it, and Rowan is going to hear his voice and do the thing she has started doing, where she turns her head toward the sound of him with the complete attention of someone who has already decided that person matters. And he is going to take her from me with the competence of someone who has spent 9 months learning exactly how to hold her, and I am going to make coffee. The real kind, not the terrible hospital kind. And for a while, the three of us are going to be in the same room in the ordinary way that is also somehow still remarkable. I am not going to say it is the beginning of something. I have learned too much about the cost of believing in neat beginnings, but I am going to say it is something. And something, right now, is more than I had when I stood in a doorway 8 months ago, smelling rain and feeling like the sky was leaning down against my chest. Something is more than I had sitting on a hospital floor at 3:15 in the morning, in the dark of a corridor, working up the nerve to knock. That is what I know now. That some things that seem finished have a different chapter waiting in them that you didn't know to look for. That the knock, when it finally comes, is worth answering. That the Omega, who never wanted to see the Alpha again, opened the door anyway. And that the Alpha, who had driven 3 time zones in the dark on a night's notice, was, in the end, exactly who he had always been. Waiting. If you made it to the end, you're my kind of person. Leave a subscribe, comment down your favorite part of the story, and if you want early access to videos, exclusive content, or just want to support the channel, make sure to join our Patreon. Link is in the description. Even one member genuinely means the world to me. See you in the next one.